I feel compelled before I get started to apologize to Lainey. I've never seen her do this in my entire life, 21 years. So, apologies. Sometimes it's more fun to be funny than correct, you know what I'm saying? It can be a wonderful life. This is the message of the great Christmas movie starring James Stewart as George Bailey. George Bailey lives in Bedford Falls. He leads a building and loan company that was founded by his father. His goal was to keep Mr. Potter from taking over the entire town. And on Christmas Eve, his uncle loses a bank deposit containing $8,000. Mr. Potter finds the money, but hides it. The bank examiner discovers it, and George knows that he'll be held accountable and that the company will have to close. Thinking his wife and children and others would be better off with him dead, he contemplates suicide, wishing he'd never been born. In the meantime, angels are discussing Clarence, an angel trying to earn his wings. Clarence is sent to help George, but in fact, George ends up rescuing Clarence, who appears in the raging river. Clarence proceeds to show George what it would truly be like if he'd never been born. Let's take a look.
Are you sure this is Bailey Park?
No, I'm not sure of anything anymore. All I know is this should be Bailey Park. But where are the houses?
We weren't here to build them. Your brother, Harry Bailey, broke through the ice and was drowned at the age of 9.
That's a lie. Harry Bailey went to war. He got the Congressional Medal of Honor. He saved the lives of every man on that transport.
Every man on that transport died. Harry wasn't there to save them because you weren't there to save Harry. You see, George, you really had a wonderful life. Don't you see what a mistake it would be to throw it away?
Clarence,
Yes, George?
where's Mary?
Oh, well, I can't...
I don't know how you know these things, but tell me, where is she? If you know where she is, tell me where my wife is.
I'm not supposed to tell.
Please, Clarence, tell me where she is.
You're not going to like it, George.
Where is she?
She's an old maid. She never married.
Where is Mary? Where is she? Where is she?
She's just about to close up the library. Oh, there must be some easier way for me to get my wings.
Well, the story continues. Eventually, George says, I want to live. In the next scene, we find George in his home with his family. The bank examiner is there along with the police to arrest him. All of a sudden, neighbors begin to show up, bringing money to make up the lost $8,000.
The fool flew all the way up here in a blizzard.
Harry, how about your banquet in New York?
Oh, I left right in the middle of it. As soon as I got Mary's telegram. Good idea, Ernie. A toast. To my big brother, George, the richest man in town.
That's a Christmas present from a very dear friend of mine.
Look, Daddy, teacher says every time a bell rings, an
That's right. That's right. Attaboy, Clarence.
George Bailey, the richest man in town. Loving family and loving friends. You know, love is an incredible thing. We have phrases, love conquers all. All you need is love. And one from Gandhi that said, where there is love, there is life. And one of my favorite is from Albert Einstein, of all people. You can't blame gravity for falling in love. We also have some famous love stories throughout history. Cleopatra and Mark Antony, Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Robert Browning, Grace Kelly and Prince Vanier, and even Amal and George Clooney. Many of us know the loving relationship of a spouse or partner. We also know that love is an incredible thing in friendships. Here's a picture of Elizabeth Diamond, was diagnosed with breast cancer. Her best friend, Laura Ruffino, promised that she would take care of her 4 daughters after she dies. What an incredible act of loving friendship. Here's a picture of Laura and her husband with their family of 6 kids. The next is a picture of James Wilmert. Now, James battles with learning disabilities and is adopted, but ultimately he loses his adopted father in a tragic accident. This was a story that went to national news because a bunch of 5th graders saw him being bullied, and they teamed up to protect James and befriended him. And they discovered even that he enjoyed video games and was capable of playing video games with them. They purchased him an Xbox to join in with them. James said, all of these guys are the best friends anybody can ask for. This is 89-year-old Erling Kendam and 4-year-old Emmett Rickner. They became best buddies as neighbors, playing baseball in the backyard, talking about bugs, fixing bikes, and racing lawnmowers. That sounds like fun. Well, ultimately, Erling had to leave the area because they sold the home. He went to an assisted living facility far away, and his heart was broken. Broken because a loving friendship meant so much. Friendships start in loving hearts. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the Apostle Paul tells us that love is more important than sacrifice, that love is more important than faith. It's more important than understanding all of the mysteries and all of knowledge. In 1 John, we're told to love one another, that love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but love is the one quality, one God quality that everyone should exhibit above all others. How do we come to embody that love? How do we come to make that a part of our lives? Well, the Apostle Paul lets us in on the secret in a prayer passage in Ephesians chapter 3. For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all of the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. What an incredible passage. Let's unpack this for a moment. He says that you would be rooted and established in love. Those words are so visual. rooted. It's like the taproot of the tree or the roots of a plant that are underneath the ground, but they bring nourishment. And they also keep you from being moved away. It holds you in place. That's what being rooted in love does. Also says to be established. And I looked up the definition for established, and it means to grow and flourish successfully in this context. So think about that kind of love that as the root goes deeper and the roots are underneath, they nourish you continually and they keep you established and unmovable. They keep you in place and allow you to flourish successfully. Well, he moves on in the passage and says that you would have the power to grasp with all of the Lord's people how wide and deep and long is God's love. In other words, that we would have the power to grasp the dimensions, the full dimensions, and experience God's love. Again, he uses active words, the power to grasp. Think about the times when you've not had the power to grasp something. Maybe it was too heavy. Maybe it was not fit well for your hand. You just couldn't get your hand around it in a way that could really grasp it. Or maybe it was something that because you were ill or you just couldn't grasp what you usually could. And Paul says you have the power to grasp that act of strength, that act of reaching out to God's love. Because we see God's love is multi-dimensional. How wide and long and high and deep. It encompasses every experience we have. We live in three primary dimensions, but this is the spiritual dimension that encompasses all other dimensions we experience. There is no thought, action, or anything that occurs in our world that is not touched by the love of God, that we cannot escape the love of God in any way because it goes as far left and right as possible, as far high and deep as possible forever. We cannot escape the God's love that is multidimensional. God's love is to be experienced, not explained. He says that you would know the love that surpasses knowledge. Now, there are a couple of different Greek words that are used here. He says that you would know the love, and he uses the word epignosis, which means experiential knowledge. That you would know that love, that you could experience God's love that surpasses gnosis, which is just the facts and the information. Think about the difference of that. That experiential knowledge that you just understand it completely without being able to explain it, without being able to describe it completely. It goes beyond the facts and the information that God loves us. It's something that encompasses our very being. I was in Harry's restaurant last Friday, and I was sitting at the bar having lunch, and there was a young woman sitting next to me, had crossword puzzles spread out everywhere. And she was talking to the server, and Al is the server, female Al, and this woman, I hadn't met her, didn't know her name, but she's talking to Al, and she says, Al, do you know who does this song? Unforgettable, da-da-da. And Al said, gosh, I just can't think who it is. And she said, well, I think I've heard it, but I just don't know who it is. And I leaned over and said, Nat King Cole. I said, you just needed an old person to tell you. Well, it reminded me of having seen Natalie Cole in concert back in 2010. Lainey and I had tickets to go see her Unforgettable tour here in Louisville. And in that tour, by the way, Lainey didn't get to go. She got sick, so her brother Dale was my date for that night. And we're there in that arena, and Natalie Cole is singing Unforgettable with the video of Nat King Cole singing in the background, and the voices blended together. It was quite an experience. It was just so powerful. I got chill bumps then just describing what it felt like then to experience that, the power and the love of that voice of Nat King Cole's and Natalie standing there singing along with her father. This word that's translated capacity is it describes the capacity of a boat, the inside of a boat. And so depending on how big your boat is, you have that capacity. That's all that boat can contain. You know, it seems like we have a capacity for God's love the size of our boat. Some people may need a different size boat. Sometimes we need a bigger boat. That capacity, that ability to expand ourselves in a way that we can take on more and more of God's love in our day-to-day lives. Expanding that capacity so that we can discover and exhibit God's love more and more every day. God's love conveys God's character completely. This word completely or fulfillment, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. We were filled with capacity. Now it's that you may be fulfilled, that you may understand completely God's love. So it's not just the capacity, it's the fact that moves to every part of your being. And it's God's character that's coming into our lives, that we may be filled with all the fullness of God, that completeness of God, that comprehensiveness of God's love. Love of God conveys God's love completely and with all of the capacity we have. You know, we are all love hungry. The question is, where do we find it? The answer, of course, is in our relationship with God, in our relationship with a spouse or partner or friends. Watching It's a Wonderful Life, perhaps you, like I, often wondered what it would be like if I'd never been born. And what it'd be like if you'd never been born. Think of the children and grandchildren who wouldn't be here. Think of the relationships you have that those people would not have that relationship with you. Their lives would have been different if you'd never been born. I shared this story before. Back in 2001, I was privileged to found a company called Aptamera with Don Miller at the Brown Cancer Center. And we had a development drug for cancer that we were trying to move toward clinical trials. And without ever having done that, we just started, knocking down the doors every day trying to get to that human clinical trial through the FDA. We finally achieved that in the summer of 2003. In August of 2003, in the first cohort of patients was a gentleman who had a 14-inch diameter tumor in his abdomen from pancreatic cancer. They projected that he would be dead in about 4 weeks from pancreatic cancer. Well, he took one of the first doses of this trial drug. And he met with us, with the shareholders and Don Miller a few years later, talking about how incredible it was that the doctors had not been able over the years to find any trace of that tumor or any scar tissue from his cancer. And I thought back at that moment of the trivial things that we did every day with the company, whether it's just naming the drug or filling out forms for the FDA and pushing the timelines. We even had a moment that was stretching the timeline. The informed consent form, the informed consent paper that for U of L for their oversight had the wrong physical address on it for U of L. I don't know how that happened, but it was wrong. And I didn't want to send it into the FDA until it was corrected. So I called the vice president of research and I said, Nancy, we need to get that line item corrected so we can get this filing in. Can you just do that and send it over to me? She said, oh no. We don't have another meeting for 6 weeks, and we've agreed that we'll never change any form or do anything outside of those meetings. And I said, Nancy, do you understand that this could change who gets this drug and what time? Now, she got it to us a little sooner than that, but the organization, the bureaucracy was structured in a way to force meetings, not facilitate progress. But we finally got the forms in the FDA, and in August of 2003, this gentleman was able to take this drug. Now, I don't know what would have happened if I'd never been born, but it's very unlikely that Aptamera would have been informed when it was, because Don and I met each other through the introduction of another person at U of L. It's very unlikely that the timing would have happened the way it did in order to get this drug into this man's system in August of 2003 to change the world for him and those he loved. I don't know what it would be like if you'd never been born. You know, it took Clarence to help George Bailey understand that he was loved, and he loved his family, and he was loved by his family. George Bailey, in the process of those encounters with Clarence, said, I want to live. Remember Paul's message in 1 Corinthians? Love is more important than the ability to understand mysteries. Love is more important than having all knowledge and understanding everything in the world and the universe. Love is even more powerful and more important than faith. Perhaps the best words we can utter the first thing every day isn't, I want to live, but the words, I want to love. Amen.